good debt, bad debt, cut off credit cards. We hear all of these different things, and the whole world is kind of confused about, is debt good or is debt bad. Now there are extremes like Dave Ramsey, who says that any kind of debt is bad, or rather the borrower is a slave to the lender. And similarly, there are the other extreme are people like Robert Kiyosaki or real estate investors, where they will say that debt is an essential component to wealth building. In fact, it is leverage is something that actually fuels your wealth building. Now, both of these extremes are correct in their own ways, but but how do you find out where do you fit? What kind of debt is good for you, and what debt is bad for you? And how do you measure when your debt is becoming, let's say, out of bounds or uncomfortable for you? Now, for me, I grew up in an Indian household where so far debt was always considered a taboo, and so I have a low tolerance towards unnecessary debt. Of course, in some cases, I have used debt, and but my goal is always to keep it under a certain limit or try to pay it off as soon as possible. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about. Like, how do you assess your debt situation? What makes you comfortable? What should make you uncomfortable? And then how do you deal with the different kinds of debts? So first, let's get this out of the way, the definition of the different kinds of debts. So the first one are called the consumer or unsecured debt. These are things like debts on your credit card, personal loans, maybe other store cards, and so on. And these are typically unsecured because the lender is not securing any of your assets if you don't pay off that. If you don't pay off your credit card, all they will do is they will put more and more interest on that, and then at some point they will give it to collections, who will follow up with you, but they cannot take away your home or any of your possessions if you do not pay up. So that is why it is called an unsecured debt. But they also have the highest interest rates, and typically very high interest rates in the range of 15 to 20% or more. And the reason for that is the risk to the lender is much higher in this case because it is unsecured. The second kind of debt are neither kind of so unsecured as well as it's not good, because it is secured, but secured by a depreciating asset. And these are typically car loans or any other furniture loan or things like that, where there is an asset against which you are taking the loan. So you are taking the loan for buying an asset, and in your loan terms, it will be very clear that if you don't pay off the loan, or if you miss the payments, then the lender has the full right to kind of confiscate that asset from you, be it your car or any other such asset that you have taken. But here also the risk to the lender is higher because that asset is a depreciating asset. So which means that even if they take back that asset, the value has dropped below the loan value. In other words, it is called an underwater situation. And then the last kind of loans, which are pretty high loans, but they are also secured by typically an appreciating asset like a home loan or what we call a mortgage. Now, in this case, your home or any other property is the security against that loan. So you are really taking on loan to buy that property. And typically here the lender's risk is the least, because they will be able to take control of a much bigger asset, and which typically has a lot of demand in the market. And the third thing is that if you do not pay up, if they have to, what that process is called a foreclosure process. So in a foreclosure, they will also keep all of your equity. That means the amount of money that you had put down, in case they are able to successfully foreclose on you. So with these are the three kinds of debts. Now, for most of us, you will see that there is a bit of all of these three. For the most common in the US or in India or in any of the developing or developed economies are the mortgage. So a lot of people buy homes, and sometimes more than one home with mortgages. So that's one of the biggest debts that we take on. Then a large percentage of people also finance their cars. So car loan is also a kind of a regular aspect in most of people's personal finance. And then the credit cards are being used by a lot of people. This is also a reality that we use credit cards. Most of us also pay it off on time, but then there are people who are not able to pay it on time, or they do not have control on their expenses, so they keep on revolving the debt to the next month, and that incurs additional interest charges, interest on interest, and so on, and that kind of can get them into a very ugly debt trap. Now, with these definitions, once you have these, and I'm guessing that you also have some kind of debt in your personal finance. So the next question that we are going to answer in this video is, how much debt should you have, and how do you understand that whether you have a comfortable amount of debt or not? Now, some people say that if you have mortgages, you have good debt. Sorry. But if you have car loans or consumer loans, then you have kind of bad debt or not so good debt. Now, instead of having such a black and white scenario, what is most important is to understand that where does the debt stand against two things. One is your income and your assets. Now, let's look at the debt versus income ratio. And this is very important because it means that first of all, your ability to service the debt payments. That means your income is not so sufficient that your debt is creating a toll or taking away most of your income, and you do not have extra money left over for your essentials like your food, transportation, utilities, and so on. So debt to income ratio is a very important thing. Now, there are many misconceptions here. When you go out and try to take a mortgage, your lender will calculate your debt to income ratio. But what they do is they will calculate that debt to income ratio based on your gross income. And that can sometimes result in a very high debt to income ratio being allowed when compared to your take home pay. Now, the problem here is that the lender is only concerned that whether your income is enough to pay back their debt or not. They are not concerned about your other financial goals. So ideally, your debt to income, if you want to be in a comfortable financial situation, it should be less than 20 to 30% of your take home pay. So that means you still have 70 to 80% of your income for your other financial essentials, other financial goals, and the essentials of running your life. The second thing is your debt to assets. Now, why are debt to assets important? It will also show that the debt that you had taken up, is it actually improving your financial picture or not? For example, if you have a lot of debt and you have bought let's say a number of fancy cars which are depreciating, then your debt to asset ratio will become very high, because a lot of your remaining assets or their depreciated value of the assets is actually funded by very high debt, which may not be coming down so fast. But let's say if you have taken on debt to buy one, two or more homes, then each of those homes are actually appreciating, or as they build equity. Now, it is not necessary that homes will always appreciate, but typically your the lender keeps a safe margin that if it is your primary home, then they fund up to 80 to 90% of the value of the home. And at the same time, if it's an investment property, then they are more conservative. They will ask you to put at least 25%, or sometimes it is even more conservative, like 60 to 70%. Now, with this, what happens is, like if you have this kind of a debt, then your assets will most likely be above your liabilities, and this is the reason that this is called a good debt. So this is the main reason why mortgages are called good debts, and consumer debt is called bad debt. Now, if you have a lot of credit card debt, then actually you do not have any assets to show for that debt. So that debt is just standing on its own and creating a huge pressure in your financial life. So debt to asset ratio is a very important thing. And my comfort level is, if I have my debt to asset ratio as not more than 40 to 50%, then that's kind of a sleep in peace kind of debt. I know I can manage that debt, because in the worst to worst case, I can liquidate let's say 30 to 40% of my assets and be completely debt free, and even after that I'll have 60% of my net worth remaining intact after paying off that debt. So this is the reason that debt to income and debt to assets are very important measures of how comfortable you should be in your debt situation. Now, in my financial coaching program, the first thing we do is a financial awareness, or what I call the financial reboot. And in this, I do something called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in the client's personal finance situation. And we do all of these kind of analysis depending on what are their debt to income and debt to asset ratio. We can figure out that whether it's becoming a weakness or a strength, or are there opportunities to reduce it, take advantage of that, or is it becoming even a threat to that person's financial life and his other financial goals as well. So hope you liked the video. Please click the like button below and subscribe to my channel. That way YouTube will show you and people like other people like you who are interested in personal finance some of my subsequent videos. Thank you very much.